Sorry, was it supposed to be $30 million per? Like the athletes were supposed to make $30 million a piece off these fights?
When we say that there's controversy, this is part of it.
So we have this young gun, this exciting Bulgarian lifter versus one of the greatest Chinese weightlifters in history.
It was like on the trajectory of like, oh, she's going to be the fittest woman on earth this year.
I was going to say, it was one of the more shocking and surprising mid-season announcements to ever happen. Hey folks, welcome to Strength Weekly, which keeps you up to date on everything you need to know from around the barbell game, and if you're a strongman fan, the Stones game, because, you know, they don't just lift barbells. Anyway, I'm David Thomas Tao, joined by the incomparable Philip Bartholomew Bleckman. That's not his middle name, but I always forget it. And we have an action-packed Strength Weekly for you this week. Action-packed, including some controversy. Phil, strength sports and controversy, they go together like protein and creatine. Am I right? Back me up here.
Yeah, we might as well just say we're talking about controversy this week, not strength sports.
It's just controversy. Welcome to Controversy Weekly, brought to you by Strength Weekly, a subset of Barbend Media. Okay, Phil, we have 4 hot off the presses stories this week. First and foremost, Brian Shaw's highly anticipated mixed martial arts debut gets postponed. Carlos Nasar of Bulgaria sets a junior world record snatch of 176 kilograms at the European Weightlifting Championships on home soil. Hometown hero Mal O'Brien, who finished second place at the CrossFit Games 2 years ago and sat out the 2023 season, has announced she's also sitting out the 2024 season. It significantly impacts the women's field at this year's CrossFit Games, and the 2025 Sheffield Powerlifting Championship has been scheduled for January 2025. We talk about that, and I argue with Phil because I've been doing some thinking, and I disagree with Phil on a lot, and it's kept me up at night, but here we are recording. I'm going to get it all out on camera. It sure is cheaper than therapy. Phil, of all these stories, which gets you most amped today?
Oh, I was anticipating in 2024 that I wanted to see the clash between Mal O'Brien and Emma Lawson and Tia-Clair Toomey-Orr and Laura Horvath, battling for the podium. And now that Mal O'Brien's not going to be in the 2024 season, I mean, that was the biggest news to me this week. So I'm excited to get into that.
Well, we have a changed battle there with one fewer player in the field. Let's segue that right into actual battle, hand-to-hand combat. Shaw was supposed to battle Martin Fjord, and that fight was already supposed to have happened. It was supposed to have happened on February 17th. It didn't happen, so the fight has been postponed, maybe canceled, and I want to be very clear here. Everything we know is from what Brian Shaw has said and from what Mitchell Hooper has posted. We don't necessarily know the details. Brian Shaw referenced a breach of contract several times. We don't know what that breach of contract was. So everything we're about to say is coming from 3 main things: what Brian Shaw has said publicly, what Mitchell Hooper has said publicly, and the fact that none of these guys ended up fighting in Qatar like they were scheduled to do on February 17th. So let's keep that in mind, and let's move into what the heck is going on.
Yeah, tagging also onto the fact that Brian Shaw wasn't making his MMA debut, neither were the other 2 elite strongmen on the card. Reigning world's strongest man Mitchell Hooper was supposed to take on Eddie Hall in their MMA debuts, and that fight didn't happen either. Now, what we learned from Brian Shaw on their end was that there was a breach of contract where there was a large amount of money promised to these athletes. Now, the numbers that we heard from Mitchell Hooper on his Instagram story was that it was a $30 million contract down to a $3 million contract. Now, that is still a lot of money, but there was a fallout of contract. The event still actually happened. The fight event that was scheduled still took place. It just didn't happen with any of the strongmen actually competing in any of those fights that were initially built up for. So what we got was that it's postponed, but it sounds like it's just straight canceled from the feedback that was given from the athletes after this supposed breach of contract.
Sorry, was it supposed to be $30 million per? Like the athletes were supposed to make $30 million a piece off these fights?
When we say that there's controversy, this is part of it. Like, this was the first glimpse into how much money was actually being posed to these athletes who had never stepped into the ring before. So 30 million per sounds outrageously high. However, who knows? Maybe that is, I guess, something that could happen. Even down to 3 million. I mean, that's a significant cut, but 3 million for athletes that have never stepped into the ring before or into the octagon before is still a very large prize purse. But yeah, I mean, if you were preparing to make that kind of money and then have it come down, a couple weeks before the fight actually is supposed to happen, I would be upset too. And Brian Shaw did relay that he was very frustrated and disappointed that the fight was being postponed.
Brian Shaw has said publicly that he was doing this not so much for the love of the fight game, but to secure his family's financial future. Yeah, I mean, if we don't know, like we haven't seen these contracts, so we don't know. But if the contracts were like up to $30 million a piece, yeah, I'd say that's a step in securing one's financial future and one's family's financial future. It's a weird situation. It's a very weird situation. I know we were really excited. Also, Mitchell Hooper, reigning world's strongest man, was set to compete at the Arnold Strongman Classic just basically 2 weeks after. It was sort of this like, what is going on here? The incentives must be huge. And Mitchell's post gives some insight into the fact that the incentives were huge. They were in the 7 figures, maybe even into the mid 8 figures when it comes to like what these athletes could have made. I'm not saying we won't see these athletes in the octagon, because I think there's interest. We see that if the money is right, there's interest in these athletes fighting. The whole thing is confusing right now. I wonder if more information will come out. The event did happen. It just didn't feature Martin Fjord, Mitchell Hooper, Eddie Hall, or Brian Shaw, right? It just happened without those folks on the card. And it's also interesting to see because all 4 of these guys have been training. They've been training in MMA, right? And Brian Shaw has been very public about how hard he's been training, how much he's been dedicated to this style of training. I wonder if there's an added incentive now because these athletes have explored training in this discipline, in this fighting style. Maybe they want to utilize that. Maybe they want to monetize that.
Yeah, Hooper had shared that he was sort of concerned with how the transparency of the event was going down from the jump, and that he didn't train as hard as it may have been led to believe at the beginning when it was first announced, though Shaw was consistently training in the gym and giving updates routinely on how he was training. So the way that they went about it was different, but Hooper seemed to have sniffed that there was something awry early on, and then it just so happened that there was. So he didn't train as hard. I mean, granted, he had something else to train for, and whereas Shaw didn't. I mean, Hooper is the reigning Arnold Classic champion, and he will attempt to defend in Columbus. So this will not be the last we hear of it. I expect that there will be a rehashing, and I imagine the athletes, too, will come back to the table, because where the money is where the athletes will go.
All right, Phil, well, one event that did go down and one athlete that did perform is the European Weightlifting Championships, and Carlos Nasar of Bulgaria, still a junior weightlifter and maybe a favorite, or certainly a podium contender heading into the Paris Olympics. Well, he done set a junior world record snatch, and guess what? It was on home soil because the competition was in Bulgaria. Phil, what did Nasar do?
So every time this guy steps onto the platform, I feel like we're talking about world record implications. In this case, he snatched a 176 kilogram or 388 pound record snatch in the men's 89 kilogram class. Now, this was at the 2024 European Weightlifting Championships, which, as you said, took place in Sofia, Bulgaria on February 12th to the 20th. So as we're recording this, the competition is still wrapping up, but Nasar's part of it is done, and he has a record in the books.
This is a big deal for Nasar for a few reasons. One, this is one of the last qualifying events for the Paris Olympics for weightlifting at the international level. He snatched 176. He clean and jerked 215, ended with a 391 kilogram total. That's actually 4 kilos below his best ever total, which is 395. Nasar currently sits in second place in the overall world rankings behind Li Dayin of China with that 395 total. It's interesting because China's had these weight classes, these men's middle weight classes on lock for a while. Nasar is coming out and saying that he might really be able to battle for gold in Paris against Li Dayin of China, which was unthinkable 2 years ago. It was unthinkable that a non-Chinese athlete would really have a shot. This sets up for me the 89 kilo class in Paris for the men to be the most exciting men's competition, because we get to see Nasar, who is dramatic on the platform and is not afraid to take big jumps and not afraid to go for world records, right, against Li Dayin of China, who is the current number 1 ranked athlete in that weight category. So we have this young gun, this exciting Bulgarian lifter versus one of the greatest Chinese weightlifters in history. I think it's going to be an epic throwdown in Paris. Phil, I cannot think of a better potential head-to-head across the bodyweight categories for men or women in Paris.
Yeah, this category jumps out to me in particular because in the previous Olympic cycle, when Lu Xiaojun of China was also still in competing in 89 kilograms. China had to debate whether or not they were going to send their like flagship gold medalist in Liu, or if they were going to send their like top ranked lifter in Li Dayan. And we've covered Li in ways where it's like, this dude can't make weight because he's got too much muscle on his frame. Like, to see Nasar posting weights that are in range of competing with Li Dayan, I mean, this is it. Like, Nasar is showing he is capable, that he is going to contend for the top of the podium.
Yeah. I think that for Nasar to be a high profile weightlifter from Bulgaria, there's a lot of national pride wrapped up in Bulgarian weightlifting. And to see an athlete of his caliber compete at this level has got to be exciting for longtime Bulgarian weightlifting fans. So Carlos Nasar, I'm going to throw it out there. Most exciting athlete, right? Most exciting weightlifter on the planet right now. Boom.
Yeah, given that he's recovering from the insane injury that he had before, to come back so fast, like, I mean, what a story, right? If he actually does like magically win gold in Paris, what a trajectory he has had as such a young athlete.
Yeah, and I mean, no signs of slowing down. In fact, quite the opposite. But let's talk about a young athlete who is taking a step back from competition, or at least continuing a step back from competition. And that's Mal O'Brien of the United States. She finished in second place at the 2022 CrossFit Games. At the time, she was the youngest ever podium finisher at the CrossFit Games. Now, that title has since been usurped because Emma Lawson of Canada was younger when she finished on the podium last year in 2023. Mal O'Brien was kind of considered the next great thing. Finished second only to Tia-Clair Toomey in 2022. In 2023, partway through the season, decides to say she's not going to compete. Took time off for some unspecified personal reasons, something we've seen athletes do before, something we've seen young athletes do before. In recent Strength Weekly broadcasts, I've talked about how excited we were for the women's field because Tia's back. Defending CrossFit Games champion Laura Horvath is competing. You have Emma Lawson of Canada, right, who has her sights set on that title. And then we said, hey, Mal O'Brien's coming back. Haley Adams, another young athlete who's done quite well at the Games and has a string of top 10 finishes, is back this year. But O'Brien, in a recent post, shortly after we recorded last week's Strength Weekly, said she is taking this season off. She has moved to Hawaii. Just says she is not necessarily done competing in CrossFit, but is going to be involved in the sport and the community in other ways. Phil, what did O'Brien say? And what reasons, if any, did she give?
She said, and I quote, "My focus overall is my well-being as a person. It's not something I focused on almost ever. I won't be competing in the 2024 CrossFit season. It's not what I need in my life right now." She also said, "Just because I'm not competing in the 2024 season doesn't mean that I won't ever. I'm not putting a timeline on anything. I'll forever be a part of the sport." So we know that she won't be competing in 2024, but 2025 is still maybe in play. Maybe it's 2026, who knows? But whenever she does, she said that she is still training. It is part of her life. Whether she's training at the level she would need to compete at the highest levels, unknown. But when she does come back, I would still consider her to be one of the top players, because in last season, before she decided to step down, she was competing with HWPO with Matt Frazier, and he's got a string of pretty good finishes. Also, she was doing very, very well before she decided to withdraw. She won the Worldwide Open on the women's side, and then she also won the quarterfinals. So it was like on the trajectory of like, oh, she's going to be the fittest woman on earth this year.
I was going to say, it was one of the more shocking and surprising mid-season announcements to ever happen in the sport of CrossFit, because she won the Open, she won the quarterfinals, and then she withdrew. And Phil, by the way, you read those quotes so well. You can read quotes to me all day. We pop those on screen. I'm like in it, your melodic tones. Professional voice actor, Phil Blackman. Fun fact. Anyway, I do want to point out, Mal O'Brien is young. We do not know all of her goals in life. People are multifaceted. Even people in CrossFit are multifaceted, right? As multifaceted as the sport itself, there's a lot of pressure on these young athletes. And training is very much a full-time job and then some. It is arduous. It is tough. I think when Matt Fraser retired, he talked a lot about how you're giving not just 100%, you're trying to find more capacity. You are trying to find more to give to the sport, because it is that all-consuming, the training, the recovery, everything. It seems like Mal O'Brien is not running away from anything, but she's running towards some life experiences and a lifestyle that gives her a little bit more happiness, is what it seems like from my completely unqualified perspective. And if that's the case, I could not be happier for this very young, very talented athlete to run toward something and to run toward the things that give her joy, right? And it's okay to not get a lot of joy and to not find your ultimate joy in training for 12 hours a day and recovering for the other 12 hours. Like, that's okay, right? That's, even if you're good at something, it doesn't mean you have to do it.
When Fraser has talked about these young athletes before, and particularly Mal O'Brien, when he was dominant in the sport, he was not a teenager the way that these athletes are. He has expressed that, like, somebody like Mao, where they are in their training versus where he was when he was at the pinnacle of the sport, he was like, they are so far ahead of where I was. Like, granted, Fraser was an Olympic weightlifter. He had broken his back and had to recover from that when he was younger. But like, he was surprised at how early these athletes were in their careers at the level that they were already at. But like, at the cost of that is, okay, well, then you didn't live your college years out. You were in the gym. And we know from Fraser's training, he would wake up, train, eat, sleep, repeat. That was his life while he was the champ. And that, like, could he have gone longer? Yeah. But like, when your life is entirely consumed by like, how can I improve my sleep? How can I improve my diet? Like, it is a full-time job that is your entire life. It's not like you can step away and still be at the top of the game.
You don't clock out at 5, right?
Because if
you're not training, you're recovering and you're trying to optimize your recovery, right? It's so, all that to say, I'm excited to see Haley Adams back this season. We won't see Mal O'Brien back this season, but I gotta respect Mal O'Brien's approach here. I think that there's a lot more support she's getting from the community than she would have years ago, because I think the community has gotten a lot better at understanding athletes as people from a more holistic sense. Let's move on to our final story of the day. It's an announcement. The Sheffield Powerlifting Championships, one of the more exciting events in powerlifting, is returning in 2025. We just finished the 2024 version. It's coming back in January, so a little bit earlier, January 2025, in Great Britain, jolly old England, as I like to joke. Phil, do you think the Sheffield Powerlifting Championships are the most exciting thing in powerlifting?
Given what we saw at the 2024 Sheffield, which is only the second edition of the contest, oh yeah. It had some of the best athletes in the world that all qualified by competing at the World Championships in that same year and hitting 95% of the world record total in their weight class. They came in, 24 athletes, 14 of them broke total world records. I mean, we saw on the women's side, 11 of them broke the total world records. We mentioned last week how crazy it was that Amanda Lawrence, she broke the world record total in the women's 84 kilogram class and came in 11th. Like, it still boggles the mind even now. So the fact that this competition is coming back and is already announced that there will be on January 26th, 2025, returning to Sheffield City Hall. I mean, it's the Super Bowl of powerlifting at this point, isn't it?
All right. I disagree.
Wow.
Phil. I think you're wrong. Here's why.
Talk to me. How could it? With these numbers, David, how could it not be?
But I have a path for it to become the premier event. Okay. I'm not just raising problems. I'm providing solutions here. All right. Here's the deal. I think the Sheffield is a great format, and I think it's exciting, but I don't think it's the most important or most exciting competition in powerlifting, because you know what it doesn't have attached to it? You can't call yourself a world champion. You win the Sheffield, you can't call yourself a world champion. You're the Sheffield champion. Cool. I've never heard of powerlifting. Oh, you're into powerlifting? Cool. Tell me about that. Well, I'm the Sheffield champion. What the hell does that mean? Okay. It's not a world championship. It's not a world title, and it doesn't carry that gravitas. I'm sorry, but ultimately, to take something mainstream and to make it relevant outside of these niche strength communities that we're in, you gotta have the world. You gotta be champion of the world. Right. You gotta be able to say that, right? Arnold Strongman Classic champions, great, right? But I'm gonna be honest, it ain't world's strongest man. It isn't that title. And you could argue all you want about the quality of competition. But until the Sheffield is considered a world championship, and until it is designated as such, I do not think it has the same relevancy, especially crossover into the mainstream, as something like a true world championship.
Who would need to designate it as such? Because from where I'm sitting, the athletes designated it pretty well. I mean, Sitko crushing 109% of the world record total in the 69 kilogram women's class, just obliterating every record that we've ever seen at that weight class. I mean, if anybody's going to designate it, I imagine it's the athletes that are stepping on the podium and actually putting in the work. Now, I can see what you're saying of like, it doesn't have the optics of a world championship, but is that just because the competition's still in its infancy?
I think, okay, what is the governing body that these athletes compete in, Phil, for the Sheffield?
This is the IPF. This is the IPF.
Right. So I think what the IPF could do and I don't know if the IPF has the incentive to do this, but I think what would take the Sheffield over the top is if the IPF gave a designation and worked with the Sheffield event organizers and said, okay, we're going to bestow a special title. Whoever wins the Sheffield, it could be on the men's side and the women's side, or just overall, it could be just overall, whatever, gets to call themselves for 1 year world's best powerlifter. I think that in order for this competition to level up and to become what it really could be, the winner or winners on the men's side and the women's side has to be able to say they are the best powerlifter in the world in a way that no one else can officially say.
So, okay. So you're saying you got to have a title. So you want them to walk out with a world championship belt and be able to cut the promo. I hear that. So we started at odds and now we're on the same page, because I agree that the competition is already at the level, and it should have the backing and title and optics to go along with it to really, because in my view, it's like, this is the all-star game. This is the top of the top, even though there are some of the world's best that aren't here, right? Like, that's the exclusivity part of it, which I feel like is an additional, level up tacked onto it, and why it's such a big deal now. So yeah, I agree. IPF, let's codify some stuff.
You could even call it world's strongest powerlifter in the world. I'm not a trademark lawyer. These are just ideas. Phil, I'm glad I like arguing with you, because I learn, because you change my mind more often than not, but I think I might have brought you toward my camp.
You brought me around. You brought me around this time. The thing is, you brought me around in my stubbornness. You didn't change what I wanted. You gave me more of what I wanted.
So, we're additive here. We have a surplus mind. We have a surplus mindset. We got a surplus mindset. Well, until next week, when we'll bring a new surplus mindset, add more weight to the proverbial mental bar. I'm David Thomas Howe, joined by...
I'm Phil Bleckman. Everybody, thank you so much for joining Strength Weekly. We will catch you next time.